So sometime back, me and my wife were walking by the lake, and I see this guy, and he's catching fish, and pretty big fish, and he's grabbing them, and then he's throwing them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are you doing, dude? And he's like, oh, I don't need the fish. I'm not going to eat them. I just enjoy the sport of catching the fish, and I'm really good at it. All the other people that we were seeing, they weren't catching any fish, but this guy, he caught the fish, and he released the fish. In our personal lives, there are some things that God asks of us, and He will not let us off the hook. Morning, guys. Today we're going to be in Exodus. We're going to be in chapter 4. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and crack those open. We're going to look at just two verses, 24 and 25. Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, on the backside of Mount Horeb. That is the mountain of God. You guys know the story. He stops what he's doing. He sees a burning bush, and he goes over to the burning bush. God says, "Take off thy shoes, for the place that you're standing is holy ground." Moses does just that. Delayed obedience, I'm always telling you, is not obedience. He gets instructions. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. I'm going to send you, Moses, to go get my people. You guys know the story. And finally, Moses is on his way, and that's where we're picking up today. And it came to pass by the way of the end, meaning this: Moses has been traveling, and there's a place where he's going to stop. There's an end there. It's like a hotel. You guys like, after a long day, you want to go to the hotel. You're traveling along, and you get to the hotel, and you have kids. Besides eating, what's the first thing most of the time most kids want to do? Dad, we want to go swimming. We want to go swimming. So Moses is traveling. He's going to spend the night at an end. But listen to the story. And it came to pass by the way of the end that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. God is about to kill Moses. And God isn't just putting this story here because He's threatening. God is going to follow through with this if something doesn't transpire. What is that? It is something that God had already spoken to him that he needed to do. Let me ask you this question. Has God spoken something to you and you just disregarded it? In my life, I can truly say the majority of things that God has spoken, and I knew it was God, I did. All of them, no. Most of them, yes. Why? Because He's God. No other reason. He's God. God had spoke something to Moses that needed to take place prior to Moses going to Egypt. We don't know why Moses didn't do it, why Moses blew it off. He obviously had mentioned it to his wife, but his wife pushed back. Friends, do you see why you want to be equally yoked? That you want to be on the same page with your wife, like-minded in the faith? That's why when you marry someone who's lost, or your marriage is based on you fooling around before you got married, it never lasts. There's all these reasons why people get married, but if it isn't because God said, this is your spouse. But Moses said something to his wife, and there's an argument, and who won? Listen. Who won in the argument? The wife did. But listen to this. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, "Surely a bloody husband art thou to me." How did she know to do that? Because they had talked about it before. God's requiring this of us. You and I, unless we understand what's behind this, we can't conceive how in the world the angel of the Lord, which is God Himself, with the sword, is going to take his life. And basically, his wife saves his life. She grabs the kid really quick, grabs a piece of sharp rock, and cuts off the foreskin of his penis right there with the angel, with the sword drawn, grabs it and throws it down at Moses and says, "You're a bloody husband." She's really angry. The next verse says, then the angel let them go. You're like, why is it such a big deal to God? Do you remember when Moses was walking over to the bush? God spoke to him. Take off your shoes. The place where you're standing is holy ground. And Moses has a question. He says, what if the people in Egypt ask your name? What do I say? And God said this, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am that I am. See, Moses, he just didn't see the big deal in it. But to God, it was a big deal, because what that circumcision meant was that I'm identifying with the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which was the removal of the foreskin. You can't go and have God's blessing when you haven't listened to what he said. See, God's saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but you aren't following suit according to my law and my customs and what I demanded. You need to identify with this covenant, because it is covenant theology. And again, you and I were alluded to it. And if we would get alone with some of our Jewish brothers, they could tell you about covenant theology. I mean, they would blow your mind if you could understand this much of what God meant. There's a picture in the Old Testament. And what it is God was cutting up all of these animals. And he was putting half on this side, and 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 half on that side. And you're like, well, what did that represent? Well, in the Old Testament, it represented an agreement. It represented a covenant. And so what you would do is you would talk to a person and say, I want to buy your land. And he would say, okay, and I'll sell my land. And how much will you sell your land for? $5,000, and then in 2 years, $5,000 more dollars. And so what they would do is they would lock arms, and they would walk through the middle of the animals. And then they would exchange $5,000, and the person would give them the deed. And what they're saying is this, let you cut me asunder if 2 years from now I don't give you an additional 5. You cut me asunder. Cut me in half. If in 2 years I don't give you $5,000 more dollars and complete the transaction. Never. Walk by yourself through the animals and expect the person that you are making the agreement with to walk behind you. Because if you walked and you said you were going to give them $5,000, you walked through the animals. You owe him $5,000. He didn't walk through the animals. That's why you had to lock arms. And you would lock arms and you would walk together on any agreement. And you have to realize that the animals, they're separated. There's blood. But God comes to Abraham. And there's all these animals that are split in half. And God doesn't make Abraham go through the animals. God goes through the midst of the animals with a torch and a smoking oven, which was representing the holiness and the brilliance and the magnificence of our God. A conditional covenant where something was required of Abraham. It was God saying, I'm going to do this, Abraham, regardless of you. Because when God found Abraham initially, he was on his hands and knees and he was worshiping pagan gods. God is saying this, you can't be my spokesperson. You can't go before me. You didn't listen to me. Genesis says, the wages of sin is death. The sword's coming down. The sword is coming down. Watch very carefully who influences your life. Moses allowed his wife to influence him and to negotiate with him in a manner and a way where he did not do what God asked him to do. Do you understand? I'm not throwing rocks at this woman. I'm just telling you that if God tells you to do something, It's not time for a prayer meeting. It's not time to ask someone. If you need clarification, you go straight back to God immediately. Did I hear you correctly? I am willing to obey. I'm going to obey. Did I hear you correctly? Just this week, God had spoken something to me, and I didn't like what he spoke. And I was thinking, Lord, was that you that spoke it? I didn't hear anything. Guess that means no, but I kept on praying because you can't leave that stuff loose, okay? Loose and fast is not how you want to live the Christian life. And I went back to God, and I went back to God, and I went back to God, and God kept on bringing it up into my spirit. And then finally, he showed me something. As soon as he showed me something, it was something that I had found, I knew God wanted me to do what he told me to do. I asked for forgiveness for not doing it immediately, but I continued to seek him out. God knows you and I aren't perfect, that we're made of flesh and we're going to crash and burn every single day of our lives. But we have to realize when God is speaking something into our life, and it is a decretive word, okay? Look at. All heaven is backing him. His name is on the line, and his sword is drawn. We don't know God in that manner. We don't know God in that way, but King David did, because David is looking at the threshing floor of Ornan, and right above the threshing floor is the angel of the Lord with his sword drawn. 70,000 people have already died, literally already died, and the text tells us that David was scared. And yet if we go to Psalm 23, we're going to find something that's so remarkable. And I haven't been to a funeral yet that I hadn't heard Psalm 23. Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me by the still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the shadow of death, I won't fear, for thou art with me. Thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You know, a lot of times we think of God in that manner, and he is. He is the great shepherd. He is a God of mercy, grace, love, patience, long-suffering. He's all of those things, guys. Oh, and how many times have I got a second chance in my life? How many times have I got a third chance and a fourth chance and a fifth chance? Friends, I could probably go all the way to 100 in certain areas of my life where the enemy was just slaying me and my flesh was overrunning me and this world taking its toil on me. And God was so good to me. He's so good to us. Is he not? But sometimes we're not dealing with the shepherd. Sometimes we're dealing with the risen King. And in the book of Revelation, we have a snapshot. We have a picture of John, the beloved disciple. I always think of him in the Last Supper, leaning his head on Jesus' chest and just loving on Jesus. Just absolutely loving him. And yet, on the Isle of Patmos, Jesus shows up in his glorified form. And John said he was like a dead man. He was laying there. He thought he was going to die. He couldn't breathe. He was just trembling. He was shaking. All the blood went out of his face. And if God hadn't have touched him and breathed new life into him, John would have been dead that moment. You have to understand the different faces of God. There are times when, yes, he is the great shepherd of our hearts, but there are times when he may come into your life in a manner and a manifestation which you've never experienced before. This is what took place with Moses, okay? Moses didn't understand how important this was to him. in my own life. I'll read something to you. I had an encounter with God, and I don't need to say more. And I was troubled, very troubled, by who God is. Anytime that God allows us to experience more of Him, you're like Job. You're like Isaiah. You're like Daniel. You're like John. We think, honestly, we know God. I'm here to tell you, you don't. You know about Him. You know just enough, okay? But after this happened in my life, I turned here because, I was so troubled. And it's Psalm 50, verse 21. These things hast thou done, and I kept silent. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such as one as thyself, but I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. In certain areas of my life, I thought I was okay. I don't need to go into it, what they are, but they were not approved by God on any level. It wasn't even, in my mind, a gray area. I thought, I am right in this area, in my belief, in my understanding. And God came up over the top, and He scared me. He terrified me. And He allowed me to know that He did not approve of my belief and my attitude about something. He was silent. He was quiet. See, God doesn't have to tell you anything. That's why I'm always saying, and I'll continue to say it till the day I die, the littlest of sins in our life will blind us to the overall truths of God and His Word when we incorporate those things in our life. Just the smallest of something can blind you to the bigger things. And that's what had happened to me. Something, I think, so small had blinded me over time. What took place, Matt? Roy, it doesn't matter what took place. I repented. I said sorry. Spiritually speaking, I put dust on my head, ripped my clothes, put sackcloth on, spiritually speaking. I humbled myself before the Lord and I begged for forgiveness. God's sword was drawn. I hope none of you ever have to go through anything like I did because of your arrogance and your pride and thinking you can choose in this life what you want to do. Friends, I assure you, you cannot. And if you are dabbling with sin or sins or things that God has said no to, and you're not hearkening unto God, you're in trouble. I've been studying Jude for some time now, and there's a place in Jude where it talks about three groups of people. In one group, they just have questions about God. They're not saved. They're just like, well, I don't know if God is or God isn't. You know what God says about that? Be very merciful. Don't judge them. Love them. The next group, if they keep on that path, will end up in hell. They're an amber that needs to be taken out of hell. They need to hear the truth. They need to see the love. They need to see God's mighty manifestation in your life. The Bible tells us if you can share the gospel, if you can witness, if you can come alongside in love and build someone back up and get out of that self-dependent life that they can do it all on their own, you've gained a brother, you've saved a soul. But there was a third group. You know what it said? It said, have mercy on them. Don't judge them. But they're dangerous. Meaning this, being around such men will defile you. It will destroy you. You just have to leave them alone. You can love them, you can pray for them, but it's like taking poison. And I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen that before. And it was tied in to Psalm 1. Watchman Nee had a great career book teaching on Psalm 1. Walk, sit, stand. But it says this, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Group 3 has become scornful. The Bible warns, don't cast pearls before swine because they'll rend you. They'll come after you. God has to lead us in who we witness to. Do you agree? You should. It's in the Bible. But also, we're to be merciful with everyone and love everyone. And we can do that by respecting people and wishing the best for them. Because the end result isn't up to you. It's up to God, what He does, not what you and I do. We are judged, and God judges accurately. But we are forgiven by the blood of the Lamb, by Jesus Christ alone, not by all the things that this world conjures up. Moses was about to lose his life, literally about to lose his life. David saw what I'm talking about. John saw what I'm talking about. Ezekiel in chapter 1 saw what I'm talking about. Daniel saw what I'm talking about. David said this, Lord, please look inside me. If there is anything inside me that is not pleasing, honoring, if there's any hidden sin that I can't see, please, Lord God, out of your mercy, out of your grace, out of who you are, would you please reveal it to me? Because this text tells me He doesn't have to. He can remain silent and allow you to live that out every day of your life because you believed a lie. And then you swallowed a delusion that, hey, the life I'm living was okay. What I believe is okay. What I'm doing is okay. And friends, it wasn't okay with God, what I believed and what I was doing. It wasn't. And like I said, He had the sword out. And you never, honestly, want to meet God in that manner, in that way. You don't. God says, humble yourself before me. I'll lift you up. Men, take care of things in your family. Take care of things in your own life. If you know something is of God, you need to do it. It doesn't matter. Look, it doesn't matter if your wife says no. You're going to have to be what? Head of household. No, honey, I love you, but God said I need to do this. And you need to move forward in obedience. Rather honor God and line up with the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob than to honor man and be rejected and be killed. Because that's what it came down to in Moses' life. You and I, on a normal basis, we don't run into things like this as much as Moses did and other people have. But it is possible that you are walking a tightrope. Jonathan Edwards' greatest sermon ever was Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. As he preached that under that big, gigantic pulpit, he never looked up once. He preached it looking down because he could not look the congregation in the eyes because of the weeping and the crying and the moaning. He described hell, and he described a lot of his congregation were going to experience that hell because they were playing games with God. You can look up that sermon. It's actually here, the first 30 minutes of that sermon. In my playlist, it's called The Realities of Hell, and it's Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. The reason there's only 20, 30 minutes of that sermon is because most people could not take more than that. The entire sermon will put you in a mental funk for weeks, if not months, questioning all these different things. 20 minutes is what you need, honestly, to reflect upon your own life, to ask God into your heart afresh, to rededicate your life and to go a different direction. Guys, the direction that God wants us to go is a good direction. God's not asking too much of us, but He is God. Okay, do you realize that He is God and He has the right to demand anything that He wants? And when He gets to these certain points in our life where He decrees something, it's not up for negotiations. It's not up for discussion. It's up for immediate obedience. Here am I, send me. Yes, Lord, I'll do it. No arguments. It doesn't matter if you like it. It doesn't matter if it's your cup of tea. You do it for no other reason that He is God and you are not.